Hello, welcome back again. It is Dave from Simply Subarus and myself, Pat. We are back again with another great episode for you guys today. We are very excited. As we start ramping up towards Boxer Fest, Dave and I are getting our plans settled. We have a full weekend planned. Dave's coming out. We're going to book a place near the event and we're making a
Already
party of
booked?
it. Yep. We got these sick new hats that you can see here. It's very bright in here, but
Yes.
this is how you guys can identify us. Dave and I will have these hats on. This will be us. Nobody else will have these. We don't have them for sale, so it's not going to be an issue.
Yeah.
You guys can still pick up a t-shirt, but these are maybe a future product. But yeah, we're just really excited. We're amping up. We got a bunch of stuff for Boxer Fest. We got all the sponsor items coming and everything coming together. We're just really excited. It's really going to be a great weekend, and we're excited to meet all you guys that have been watching these episodes. I know the comments have been blowing up. Everybody's been really excited for this, so really fun. But Dave and I have a really exciting episode for you guys today. We're going to jump right into it. Today is something I didn't know I was going to get this deep into, something that I started researching and just snowballed into way more than I thought.
Dude, you went down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about fuel today. I think that one thing that has been really interesting to me is that once electric came out and once hydrogen started to pick up some traction, I think that people kind of forgot that these fossil fuels are still being used, and people thought this is kind of old news, old technology. Gas isn't going to be around forever, so they don't really care if they innovate with regular gasoline. But I think that that's actually where things are coming to light, because there's a lot of really cool things happening now with gasoline, and I think that that's where this whole story is going to start. Dave, I wanted to kind of rip through some topics. We're going to get through them, and I kind of want to hear your piece, and then we're going to go back and forth, and we'll just kind of talk about each one. Um, and we'll just kind of start there. So, our first topic of today with the fuel truths is why additives exist. Something that is a truth with every gas station that you go to is that raw fuel is very it doesn't burn very cleanly. It starts to gum things up. It has a lot of carbon that burns off when you burn it. And something that a lot of these manufacturers have to do is they have to add additives to the fuel to make sure that the fuel is going to burn cleanly, and it knocks down the CO2, and it just does a lot of things for your car that end up saving your engine. Um, and so, I was kind of interested in the difference between the raw fuel and how this all comes together. So on the pro side of it, things that I've seen are that antioxidants and stabilizers prevent gum and oxidation in your engine. Otherwise, fuel degrades in storage and pipelines as well. So it helps with the transportation of the fuel from the refinery to the gas station. You need to have all this stuff in there so it doesn't break down in the process. Detergents, usually top tier gas company spec. So, Sunoco, BP, all these companies have their own detergents that they use. And
Shell V Power,
yeah,
whatever that
yeah.
is.
And it ends up
Nobody knows.
keeping yeah. It ends up keeping injectors and chambers clean. And then Subaru's they prefer premium. Like WRX's call for premium, STI's call for premium. So they actually prefer these top tier fuels that have these specific detergents in them. That's what they're tuned for. On the counter side of this, right? Additives kind of highlight fuel's natural instability. You have to add something to fuel, or else you end up with what the early manufacturers discovered, which is that it gums up and it ruins these engines, and so there's extra work involved. So that's the one thing with other fuels, that maybe you don't have to do as much work to really make it work. You also can't see what's in your fuel. I mean, I'm sure if you looked hard enough, you could find out, but most of the detergents and the things being added in the fuel, they're all proprietary. They're all these blends. So you'll never know what these manufacturers are actually mixing to put in there. And so you don't have that back end to it. And then the last thing is that even top tier fuel can't prevent the valve carbon buildup with these direct injection engines. It's becoming a common problem across multiple manufacturers, and that's something that I think is starting to become an issue as well. So,
Sure.
what is your take on that?
You're absolutely right. I mean, we definitely there's, I think, a misconception between what is marketed to people, to you, the consumer, and what effectively is the full unabridged truth, if you will. And a better way to put that is the manufacturers can make claims based on what their findings in their independent labs or um, what have you have tested. But at the end of the day, I think we're all effectively searching the same thing. We're looking for clean, reliable fuel that isn't gonna damage our engines. There's definitely isolated incidents or incidences where unfortunately you hear about bad gas. Usually that's due to, I think, faulty equipment and things like that, or storage procedures, practices, what have you, where all of a sudden, you know, that gas station that's been on the corner for 40 years all of a sudden hasn't done any maintenance and hasn't checked those tanks that are underground and verify that there isn't uh, some water leaking in or something, and that all of a sudden you'll hear about that in the news, even sometimes where like 12 cars get stuck at a gas station. They filled up and now they can't leave. I've
Yeah.
actually, as a mechanic, I've dealt with that. And that's rarely, certainly a rare, I think a rare isolated case on the general sense. That's usually something that you can avoid. It's not saying, oh well, as I joked about earlier, Shell. If you go with only Shell gas, you're removed from that because um, I personally do a lot of Shell. Just be it that there's a Shell right by my work, right by my house, so it's very convenient. And so I wound up getting into their loyalty points program, and next thing you know, I'm getting 15 cents a gallon off. So all right, I shop at Shell a lot, but I'm not privy to saying, oh, they're the best gas, because I understand the landscape. And I think at the end of the day, what people are less akin to is understanding that landscape, as you kind of are highlighting in this episode here, is that it's easy to say that, okay, well, the manufacturer says XYZ, but what do the numbers say? And just today we saw a comment or a post in the group that was talking about coolant and whether or not Subaru coolant is the best coolant, blah blah blah. And we touched on this earlier in a very early episode, to where a lot of dealerships, which are manufacturer governed in a lot of ways, in a sense, in terms of what they can and cannot do. And I've learned, and not to say I'm trying to open the floodgates and get everyone to get their local dealers in trouble, because some of these places are very good places. And one of the reasons we, even as a proud independent, we resent the term stealership. We don't like to think about that, because there's good dealers, there's bad dealers. Same as there's good independents and bad independents. But when it comes to coolant, the manufacturer tells you you have to use XYZ. Well, if an aftermarket manufacturer makes that component, or that uh, fluid, let's say in this case, that is 100% compliant by manufacturer standards, and they even have a certification from the manufacturer that states this is good enough. This is something that the industry doesn't, you don't really, unless you're in the industry, you don't really see these things, but you don't realize that all of a sudden a dealership who's sanctioned by the manufacturer may be buying universal coolant, so to speak, and just dying it. And that's something we are very, very transparent about as an independent. Understandably, the dealers have to walk a thin line there. And I'm not trying to single out dealers, again, trying to get anyone in trouble, but at the end of the day, the dealers are mostly independently operated and owned. You have to figure from a structure standpoint. And at the end of the day, they might not present themselves as the small mom and pop, but there's still an owner that is effectively has his hands tied by the manufacturer. And if he's able to better affect his not only his bottom line, but his employees, why not?
Yeah, yeah. And you know, something about that which is interesting to me is that that again is proprietary, right? Like the type of coolant that Subaru uses, the type of coolant that Jeep uses, the type of coolant that GM uses, it's all their own formula. And so leading back into fuel, right? If you knew, right, as a shop owner, if you knew the proprietary blend that was in your fuel, if it was just out there, right? Every company had their mixture online. Would it affect where you go to get fuel? And would you try to explain to, let's say, your customers which fuel should be used in Subaru based on what's in that blend?
And that's a very good question. And I think marginally the majority of us, we're creatures of convenience. We will shop where is convenient. As I highlighted, I have a Shell by my house and Shell by my work, and they're like the closest gas stations to those, both those places. So ironically, that's where I get majority of my gas. I think a lot of people fall into that category. It reminds me famously of an article I read years ago in New York where they had a Starbucks across the street from another Starbucks,
Mhm.
and the irony was that you're like, well, wait, that cannibalizes on the other Starbucks' business. No, Starbucks knew what they were doing. This is New York City, and effectively, what they found was people that lived on respective sides of the kind of community and the areas that those Starbucks facilitated, they would not cross the street to go to the other Starbucks because the other one was closer.
Hey, I'm
And so I
also a
think people
creature
would
like that.
also just go with gas that is closest to them. And I think less, especially like you mentioned or highlighted, not to cut ahead too much, but the landscape is changing, certainly with alternatives, and unless you have the rarity, which hydrogen is a perfect example of that, because I think it's easier to have a Tesla nowadays and be able to charge that anywhere or most places compared to having a hydrogen car, which effectively there's a very limited number of facilities that can service that, not just from a repair standpoint, but just give you refuel you, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting to me. I mean, I've learned so much about fuel this week. So um we're gonna roll into the next one. I want to keep the topics rolling because there's a lot to cover. So, station choice, brand versus top tier. So, gas quality depends more on maintenance and program standards than brand logos. True or false? You know, the pros of this is that if you stick with one brand, right, you get consistent additive chemistry. So your car is used to whatever, you know, your computer adapts to whatever fuel you put in. So if you stick with one gas station with only their additives, right? Your car is it can adapt to anything, but your car is adapting to one thing instead of changing constantly. Now, whether or not that affects anything, I don't know. But um busy top tier stations have fresher, less ethanol separation, cleaner tanks. So that's the other thing is where you go for fuel. If you go to the gas station that gets 3 customers a week, right? That gas station is going to have gas in their tank that is breaking down. Even with the additives, it's just sitting there. It's old gas. They're not going to refill with with their gas tank still full. So now, right? By going to the same gas station, you're able to talk to the people there and figure out when their deliveries are and how frequently they're refilling the gas tanks. So now you know that you're getting the freshest gas in town because of how many customers they have and how frequently they're flipping gas. Um, the counter to that is that the pipeline base fuel is shared. So, um, brand only matters at the terminal, right? You could say all these refineries, it's all the same stuff, and basically once it hits the company it's distributed to, that's when they add in their little, you know, chemical X, and then it gets separated out to wherever. So, um, you know, there is a lot of oversight and a lot of testing and a lot of hoops that these companies have to jump through to make sure that their fuel is, meeting the standards and is able to leave the facility. So you could kind of argue that they're probably not all far off from each other. Um, mixing top tier brands is safe. You can get BP and Sunoco and Exxon all in the same week. It's not going to ruin anything. The detergency spec that they're all using is standardized, so the additives that they're putting in to basically retain this fuel and keep it fresh and make sure nothing deteriorates, it's all standardized. So you're kind of you running into the same thing of most of these fuels aren't very different, as far as like
I
chemically and the way
agree.
that they are. But bad maintenance kind of trumps everything, right? So if you have a brand name that is not maintaining their facilities, they're not changing out the
Hmm.
tanks when they're supposed to, they're not hiring the right people that use their stuff the right way. Maybe the drivers that they get that deliver the fuel aren't going down their checklist because they're not hiring the right people, or maybe they don't have that. Maybe there is no checklist. Maybe they just show up and dump the fuel in. Maybe some rocks land in the tank. Who knows? There's a lot of these filtration systems that try to help this, but that's kind of the counterpoint. So, I think that on this side of it, I'm a little bit more of like, I like the thought of having one station and knowing when their deliveries are and knowing that the gas is being turned consistently. And I think that that way you're guaranteed to not have stuff sitting and breaking down and
Yeah,
sediment and things getting mixed in. And like, I don't care how good your filter is. My Brita still gets stuff in my cup sometimes, it's like, it's,
I
I think
agree.
that, yeah. So I don't know which side you would be on for that, but
I fully agree, and I think the biggest thing, and I think the one ideology that kind of trumps all is, in the world that we live in, it's not always, as the old saying goes, the greasy wheel gets the grease. It's the wheel that continually turns, effectively gets more maintained. And to that ideology, if, like you said, not I've experienced this, and that reminds me of one particular uh, kind of story that relates to this, where we've all had it, we've all got that gas light on and noticed we're like, oh crap, I wasn't paying attention, and effectively kind of squeaked into a gas station here in Colorado after I kind of was coming from the West Coast to Colorado, and found myself at a very desolate gas station. And one of my telltale signs was when I pulled this gas pump handle, this thing took about, and I'm not exaggerating, I'm actually under embellishing here when I say all of about a minute to pump a gallon, 1 gallon. And I'm standing there because, of course, the little lock handle, of course, in this desolate gas station with two pumps, uh, doesn't work. So I'm just having to stand there and hold this thing. And I'm just like, something doesn't feel right about this gas station to me. And that's when I immediately pulled out my phone, started looking at the nearest gas station. It was another, let's say, 50 miles away. So I was like, as I figured that out, I was like, all right, 2 gallons, good enough. I'm calling it that. Hopefully my car still starts. And luckily, I made it to the next nearest major gas station, which was kind of a travel plaza, if you will. And I think you're right. It speaks to that volume that if you're one of those big name brand travel stations on the side of I-70 or wherever, you're more predisposed to make sure your equipment is running at the utmost highest standards, because you have effectively billions. Maybe I'm over embellishing, but definitely millions of people coming through your facility on a constant basis. We're talking truckers that are hauling our Amazon deliveries, 2-day Prime across the country. Um, these places are very well versed in making sure that they have things done right. And so I feel, as I've grown accustomed to looking for gas stations, so to speak, I definitely gravitate towards the bigger, the better, in a sense. the
Mm.
more name brand, the more volume. You're right. That gas station that you never see anybody at on the edge of town, maybe that's
See
not the advisable place to get gas.
see, the one thing about this part of it that gets me is that in the town that I grew up in, you had the mall that took up like the whole main area. So there's a like basically you got the mall and then everybody had to drive around the mall. There was all these little offshoot places around it, but generally you could cut through the mall, you could, it's a big, big place. So in that space, there was only one gas station and it's right off of Route 80. It's like just this one specific one and it's an Exxon, and so they charge whatever they want because they had no competition for like 20 years, until
Sure.
Costco started selling gas. But but they basically had this issue when I was in town where all these cars rolled up and these people were like basically about to like riot outside of this Exxon. And it was because all their cars broke down on 80 because they all got gas there and there's too much water in the fuel and all their engines died. And so they went after Exxon to try to get them to cover it. And Exxon basically said like, we're not responsible for our station. They're their own,
Hmm.
I guess it's like um like you can buy into it like a franchise kind of. So they were like,
Yep.
we're not responsible for what they did. And then basically that station just was like, too bad, not our fuel. So they
Yep.
got into this weird argument where it was like it was Exxon's fuel, but the station was responsible. But then it like they just kept fighting back and forth where like, you know, the station and Exxon were battling over whose fault it was. But basically that is a station that has a ton of cars rolling every day. They have a ton of turnover. So you would think, right, that the gas would be fresh, there would be no issues. But still, they had an issue where there was water in the tank. He got into these really nice cars and killed the engines. So,
And maybe that just goes to show you, like, to my original point, like scale. I feel like these travel plazas, if you will, for lack of a better term, the big like side of the interstate, welcome to JFK pull off, where they have you know 40 pumps.
yeah,
They probably have a couple tanks because of that reason. That way, when they probably alternate, and I feel like they do that if they were smart. Replace one, 5 years later, replace the other one. Like that way they're not really down. And they
I,
can still service
yeah,
volume.
I wish gas stations were like breweries. I wish that it was like you could get a Heineken anywhere, but this guy over here's got some IPAs, and damn, does he brew some good fucking fuel, like, I wish that that was how they kind of took these things. Yeah. I just feel like I guess the one thing that you can't control, it doesn't matter if you're a big corporation or if you're a private gas station, is you can't kind of determine the contamination of the station, right? It's how much they do maintenance on it. It's when the driver shows up, does he know what's in his tank? They have all these tests that they run through, but I feel like for stuff like that to happen, right, there has to be some things that fall through the cracks somewhere, and then it ends up just being bad gas and it ruins the car. So,
I mean, I get it
uh,
some capacity from, like I said, the earlier comment about how uh, we're in an economist world, let's say it to a sense, where, yeah, you're the busiest gas station in miles, you're doing great, you're making all this money. Do you want to shut it down for 2 weeks to put, new tanks in?
yeah, and it always blows my mind when they have to redo the tanks and how long it takes and they got to dig everything up. I'm like,
The whole gas station basically has to come up. I mean, I don't, I would say, uh, perspective. I don't put myself in their shoes because we're talking effectively millions of dollars, I'm sure. The same thing, economies of scale. If you're dealing with such a necessity like gasoline that is so ubiquitous, doesn't matter whether you drive a Ford, a Subaru, a Chevy, a Toyota, it doesn't matter. You still need gas. And if you're in
yeah,
that prime real estate, as they always say, location, location, location.
the
That's where
other
gas
problem
stations are.
the other problem is like, you have regular, premium, plus whatever, but like people who have either diesel or ethanol, like there's only one pump usually at these gas stations, and they're probably only using one supplier, and like, you know, they have their own formula, but I'm sure, right, you're kind of limited to who you can go to in that aspect. You know, there might be only one station in your town that has ethanol. If that's what you're running, you're kind of stuck using whatever they got. There is
Hmm.
no option, you know. Um but Dave, this leads me into my next topic, which this one is like got my mind really going is I wanted to know the breakdown of the supply chain, right? The refinery to the station. How many stops does this fuel have? Where does it all go? Well, basically after it leaves the refinery, there's like 15 stops that the fuel makes until it actually gets to the gas station. It's got to go through a bunch of testing. It gets split up between the airports and everything else first. And then like basically all these other companies have first, it's a kind of like they have first dibs or almost, you know. And then at the end of it all, it ends up whatever's left, it goes to the gas stations and the consumer. So my question was, does gasoline break down between the refinery and the station? And how do they combat this? And is it bad for your car when they put these additives in? I know we touched on this a little bit, but as a pro, I put long supply chain means multiple transfers. So you have risk of contamination, ethanol separation, water, right? You're constantly transferring this fuel through all these different places. And how are you supposed to control, what one driver A does to driver B and driver B drops it to C, like, you know,
Temperature, elevation.
and not just that, but they have tanker drop, which is moments that can stir sediment and water into pumps. So that's another issue. So I think that it's just a little bit of like you don't know what you're getting. But then on the counter to that, right? Pipelines and tanks are engineered to prevent breakdown. Additives ensure stability for months. And then also turnover is measured in days or weeks, well within stability windows. So they know, right, that this fuel has to go through a lot of pain until it gets to the pump. So they are adding all these additives in to kind of prepare for that. So, I think that what happens is when it gets to the station, right, the driver is supposed to do one last test as he's filling the tank or whatever he's got to do, and determines the degradation and what else is going on. So um I think the degrading of the fuel is not an issue. They've solved that. But I think the contamination of the issue is something that they still can't solve because that is human error in this process. If they just had a straight pipeline from the headquarters to the gas station, there would be no issues, but they
They
don't.
they would
So,
not have independent operators running gas stations.
no. Which something else, it's kind of ingenious because if you think about Ford, right? This is the whole thing. This always blows my mind. The biggest thing about franchising, right, is that certain franchises are smart about it. Where you look at Ford, you go to a Ford dealer and you immediately think Ford corporate, but it's not. It's a private dealer. They handle things their own way. It's their own private business. It's the same thing with UPS store. Everybody thinks it's UPS. It's not. It's actually a whole separate business. They are just like a printing and shipping company that anybody can buy into, and they have almost nothing to do with UPS other than they just tell them what to look like and what to put up in the store.
Yep, there's a
Um,
few handful of things they can and cannot do.
yeah, and they take their chunk of it. Um, Gas stations is kind of on that line of like you pull up and you think, okay, Exxon, it's an Exxon station, corporate, right? But at the same time, when you're there, they're all different. They
Hmm.
the biggest thing is that with gas stations that's a little different is when you go into a UPS store, they all look the same. Even if the building is a little different internally, right? They try to set things up as close to the same as possible. But with gas stations, they all look a little different. They all have either a grocery store, they have, a shop there, or maybe there's nothing. Maybe it's just a pump. And so I feel like it's a little bit more of that you can tell that they're different, but then when you have an issue, right? this is where you end up in that battle of, do I go after the owner or do I go after corporate? Because who owns
Yeah.
what, and where do the lines mix, and who's the owner of this place, and how do I get my resolution when there's a problem? So,
Yeah.
um, long-winded way of saying, if your fuel gets messed up, it's really hard to tell who to point the finger at. So,
Hire a
um,
lawyer.
yeah. Now, something else that we talked about before is direct injection and
Mhm.
deposits. So, once direct injection came out, basically you're not cleaning the valves and you're getting all this gunk in there, and you end up with basically carbon deposits. And so, in what way does fuel play into this, right? Does fuel even matter? And because now it's not being sprayed on the valves anyway. Um, I would say on the pro side, like top tier companies, they provide fuel that's as clean as possible. So if you're going to have carbon deposits, they'll probably be smaller if you're using Sunoco or something like that.
Not
Keeps
in
the
direct
inject.
injection though.
Well, I'm saying as far as like keeps the injectors clean, chambers clean,
Yeah.
preventing knock. I think that like you're still gonna have carbon buildup, but I think that at least the way that your car's running, it's not gonna have any other issues.
Yeah.
Um, and cleaning the chambers is more stable octane requirement over time. So there's a couple different pros to using the top tier gas companies because you just know you're getting a better product. But the counter to that is that detergents don't touch the direct injection intake valves. PCV oil vapors still cause carbon buildup. At the end of the day, right? Fuel isn't going to solve that problem. It's more of the way that things are functioning. So I think that like walnut blasting and everything is still going to be a problem as far as like trying to figure out how to solve the carbon buildup problem.
Yeah.
I know with Subarus, right, you can always add a meth kit and run it very, the lowest setting, and it'll clean the valves as you drive. Um, but as far as fuel goes, I just don't think that there's anything else that we can do to solve the carbon buildup issue. So,
Unfortunately not. And we actually just did rather I just did a walnut blasting service today.
oh yeah,
And this is again to an earlier point is one of our contentions as an independent, and this is again less to derogatory on the industry. Again, this is uh, understanding of the landscape where the dealerships have certain things, again, handful of things they can and cannot do. And I mean, humbly, if they want to sell cars at a loss, that's up to them. They'd still be out of business and they won't buy any more cars. But when it comes to certain procedures, processes, Subaru particularly is akin to doing a top, what they call it, a top engine clean, top down engine clean, something like that. And it's effectively running a BG service cleaner uh, through the intake to effectively clean out those intake valves from the carbon deposits. I've actually had more than a couple dozen now at this point customers come into me after they've had their third, Patrick, top down engine service done by Subaru at the dealer, hundreds of dollars. Then again, they vary, but 275 to 350. And yeah, dealership just says I need to do it one more time. Fourth time. Fourth time's a charm. It just didn't do a good enough job cleaning it because you have really, really dirty valves. It's your fault. I resent that. I don't believe
yeah,
in blaming the customer effectively. I mean, the customer drives off a fucking uh, over a curb. That's one thing.
yeah,
That's on them. We all see that famously in the mechanic industry when someone comes in and the whole front suspension's bent and they're like, I don't know what happened.
yeah.
Sorry, we know what happened. We can see the curb rash. We know you hit a curb.
So, do you think
But
that fuel injection service can't get all the carbon deposits off?
the only way you can guarantee that, and we know this as a fact, this is not something that we are speculating, is doing a walnut blasting service. And that's something that's been an industry standard with direct injection for over a decade now. BMW has had direct injection for a long time. And ironically, their first iterations of the service for those vehicles was a top, quote unquote, top engine clean. It was basically a BG service clean, and you detach one vacuum hose from the intake manifold, hook this thing up and tee it in, and it would suck in through the vacuum this cleaner that would go over the valves supposed to get all that stuff out and then burn it out through the engine. They never did the good job good enough. And BMW retroactively said later, we recommend walnut blasting, and they came up with their own kit and service equipment and tools because that's BMW. But sure enough, without question, a couple years later, BMW redacted that and said we need to do walnut blasting.
Hmm.
And Subaru has still not embraced it as from a manufacturing level. And that's a perfect exemplary of why we disagree with the manufacturer level of, okay, and some people might say that's what the engineers are telling me is I don't need to do this. I need to do this top engine cleaner. The engineers signed off on this. Did they?
Yep.
Or did the marketing team say, you know what? This is how we sell more cars and keep our lower cost of maintenance and ownership down and not tell people they need to do this service every 30,000 miles. We have technically, and spark plugs, granted, have gotten a lot better. Where in the old days, at least with Subarus, with turbocharged cars, you'd have to replace your spark plugs every 30,000 miles, which some people thought was exorbitant. Well, now it's 60,000 miles, so they're not quite 100,000 miles like Toyota. They're doing a lot better. But the new modern day, we call it spark plug replacement, is it direct injection bullet blasting every 30,000 miles. Unfortunately, if you have a direct injection Subaru, you need to do this. Unfortunately, about 30,000 miles, give or take.
Yeah. I was having this conversation with Dan from Flat Out Industries because I have just passed 30,000 miles on my WRX, and my business works with BG services, and we were talking about fuel injection, and my BG rep was saying that he has an Audi that's direct injection, and he pumps, two double-sized cans of 44K, and he just like pumps all of this fuel injection service through the car and just, does like 2-3 services at once. And he said all that gunk, he burns it right through.
Sure, he
Dan,
sees black smoke come out the tailpipe. Seems like it's working. Well, my question is, Dan, have you actually taken your intake
Well,
manifold off and looked at
well,
them?
well. So not Dan. I was saying that this is what my BG rep was
Oh,
saying,
sorry.
but Dan from Flat Out Industries was telling me that it actually doesn't get it all out, and you end up needing a walnut blasting. So
Yep.
it's funny that you're also saying that because I trust you guys. I think that in this industry, right? Like you got to go with the guys who know what they're doing and what they're working with, and I trust Dan. He's done a ton of work to my car, so um that's why I go to him, because he's been doing this forever. So, but it's good to hear that you guys are on the same page, because it just goes to show that industry professionals know certain things that dealers may push, but you guys have a totally different perspective on it. So,
Because
um,
we pulled intake manifolds off.
yeah, and I think it goes to just prove that you guys are the specialists. So, I think that's great. Um, so I'm gonna move on here. We got 3 more to get through. Let me take a look here. So this one is a little bit of like a throwaway. I think that this is pretty obvious, but I wanted to talk a little bit about octane myths and
Mhm.
realities. Premium versus regular, what really matters. Um, the pro to premium always is that you have higher knock resistance, safety margin, even in NA engines. And then it could help prevent octane requirement increases as engines age. I think that the higher octane that you go with, especially in like a WRX, it requires it anyway. So, I think that you're just being safe by running premium.
Yeah.
Um, the counter to that is that premium is wasted money unless required by ECU or the tune. Subaru manuals are explicit. WRX premium NA is 87 period. So you could say, why would I run premium when it says in the manual 87 for my NA? And the difference is octane is not detergency, right? So all the fuel that's coming into these stations is cleaned and has the same additives of the same detergency, but the octane level is different. So it's not that you're getting dirty fuel if you get 87, it's just that your fuel is not being given the same treatment, and it's not being, produced at the higher octane level.
Mhm.
Um, so, I would say some people say octane is a requirement, whereas I feel like some people say you can run whatever you want in an A car. It doesn't really matter. So,
Well, to that point, I always say if the manufacturers, or rather not less the manufacturers, if the powers that be that are taking the money from all of our wallets could do with less, then I think there'd be a pretty sizable conspiracy that would have been unveiled by now that they're all just selling us, regular, even though we're paying for premium. Um, but beyond that, I think that, yeah, I think there is definitely some merit to understanding the octane level and the correspondence, particularly to the overall efficiency of the vehicle, not like fuel efficiency, but like how optimally it's running. So, for example, here in Colorado, we have actually our premium is 91, and so for anyone down at sea level, they'll be like, "Wait a minute, that's we have 93." Yep, of course you do. What happens is as you move up in elevation, you require less octane because there's less air. So you have to kind of balance that as well. So that's one of the reasons that here at elevation, we have scaled down fuel to match our elevation. Beyond that, I guess their intention is that when you drive beyond here, that you should not be running on that fuel. Although at the same time, and something that you touched on earlier, and I think there's a very valid discussional point, is, oh, well, is octane all just kind of a myth? Can your car run on this X, Y, Z? Potentially, beyond a certain degree. So at the end of the day, most every modern day vehicle, or sorry, every modern day vehicle, I'll redact it, has advanced calibrations and scalings, if you will, for air fuel calibrations. And they're capable of on running on just about anything and just about anywhere to a certain degree. Where that really starts to become prevalently a problem is when you start to get into the modified aspect to where, all right, if you're running E85, you only have an E85 tune. Your car is designed to see E85. Maybe you cannot just pull up to a gas station and pull up 91 in there and expect it's going to work, or 93, because your car is not calibrated to see that. Most modern everyday cars that are out there are able to be adaptable. That being said, there's a lot of variants. That's not to say when you go aftermarket that you are removed from this. So effectively, I have a tune on one of my vehicles that is scaled accordingly because my tuner acknowledges that I travel down to sea level, fairly frequently.
hmm.
So my car is tuned to have a scaling. It's kind of like I always say a multiplication table. Imagine that in your head, where the car is able to kind of know if I'm this and this, then that, And so the majority of situations, it's not going to become a problem for most people. Even let's say if when I'm up here at elevation and I last fill up before I leave elevation, I get down to sea level and I'm still running on 91, my car's going to run fine, or vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the one thing I like that you said is that they are possibly duping us and all fuel is 87, because that would explain all the engines blowing up in every Subaru. So, I think that plays into it. I would say, yeah, I mean, if a car says 87 and that's in the manual, I mean, I'm sure that the car was, designed to run 87, but if you switch that up, it's not going to ruin anything. I think that that's all part of it. So, um,
I agree.
yeah. But I just want to move into our next section here and basically talk a little bit about something that I found really interesting is um you know, the future of e-fuels. This is something I found so interesting is that basically like e-fuels are like on the rise. It's something that's being developed. So I think there's a possibility that e-fuels and the future of fuel could basically lead to a carbon neutral world. And this could be a really interesting way to really turn the tables on fossil fuels. So, you know, something that's really interesting to me is that Porsche and Exxon have been teaming up for a while, and essentially, like, Porsche and Exxon are trying to figure out e-fuels and how to make something carbon neutral and use it to the point where you're not actually losing fuel efficiency or power. So the pro to e-fuel is that the Porsche Super Cup ran in 2024. The whole season was run on e-fuel. It was a 4-liter GT3 flat six that basically proved that it could run an entire cup series on e-fuel and survive. Not only that, there was no damages, there was no parts that needed to be replaced. The engine was clean, everything seemed to be fine, and it didn't sacrifice power. It's a drop in, no mechanical overhaul, just ECU mapping tweaks to basically be able to run this essentially synthetic fossil fuel that is pushing
Hmm.
zero carbon. And the carbon neutral life cycle, when produced with renewable hydrogen and captured CO2, creates this synthetic blend that is essentially allowing these cars to run at this level. So much like where you look at oil, right? Where we started to work in synthetic oil, and then you got 020, then you got 016, and now we're basically running water as oil. As far as fuel goes, now we're working hydrogen into the fuel, and we're finding ways to make synthetic fossil fuels and things that you can run the same power on. I would say that's a pro on the e-fuel side of things. The counter to that is that the production that they used to essentially kind of get this off the ground and pilot this, um, you know, they made 130,000 liters to run this race, right? That's not a huge take on, these manufacturers. It would require billions for global use.
Hmm.
So even though right now they're in the testing phase and they're trying, Exxon and Porsche have come together and they're trying to figure out, like, is this a viable thing to then get it up and on the market? It could already be too late. It could be that we're already pushing electric cars, and they're trying to phase out fossil fuels, and even when they just break the surface on a carbon neutral fossil fuel that's synthetic, all of a sudden they're like, nope, the government's like, we don't want that, we're done with this. I would say the other thing is the cost of it is many times higher than gasoline. It's gonna be more expensive, 100%, and you're gonna be getting essentially the same power output. It's just gonna be clean gas. And then renewable power demand is massive, so it depends on government subsidies. Again, like, it's kind of like with the whole battery discussion. How much does it cost to make a battery? What is the extent of digging up these materials to make a battery, and how many carbon, deposit, or, how much CO2 and everything else are we burning making a carbon free option? So I think that this kind of runs down that same line.
Hmm.
But basically it's been proven in racing, but how can it scale? So I'm not sure what your opinion is on that.
Well, I think it's interesting, and unfortunately, I've yet to follow up on it. I've just been overly busy since starting in the shop in a good way. But I remember that reminded me years back when Formula E for electric, of course, uh, announced, and I forget the date, but they for former or a future announced that they were going to be going effectively kind of open class, if you will. And what that meant was that or not class, I forget the way they termed it, but effectively the manufacturers had certain set requirements. Okay, you can't just build a tank, um, but you have to build something that you can build your own battery, your own motor, your own controller. It's kind of no holds barred. And what's really intriguing about that is I think that if we look back on the lineage of some of the greatest inventions or rather creations that we've had in the automotive sector, have come about from motorsport. And I think that for us to acknowledge that that is effectively a proving ground in a lot of ways, and safety is always going to predominantly be a factor. I think that's very, very important. I don't undersell that. I think that um, that goes hand in hand, with pushing the boundaries in speed as well as safety. But at the same time, it's given us so many other directives of how we think about things. What immediately comes to mind throughout all of this is what I think uh, credit where credit's due, because I think Honda was effectively the first ones really to mass market with it, was the hybrid technology. Another credit where credit's due, Toyota effectively beat them to their own game and came out with the Prius and just took over the market. And I think what it did is kind of revolutionize the way we think about coexisting technologies. And to try to encompass a silver bullet, if you will, and say that we're going to get a single momentary uh, fix, if you will, for our energy crisis, if you will, that we are constantly, you know, facing, so to speak, and it's constantly evolving. For us to not be looking at and what's the word? Things that work together, where like batteries and a gasoline engine can coexist in a Prius and give you, what are they? I don't even know what they're getting now. I feel like it's 80 miles a gallon. I'm probably wrong, but depending on circumstances, I feel like a Prius gets some of uh the kind of icing on the cake as far as about what can be achieved with our current modern day technology. And that's not to say don't look further, but to say, oh, electric is the way. Um, Unfortunately, that's far fetched from the future, long term, because unfortunately, we just don't have the electric infrastructure to support everybody being electric right now. Nor does the electric technology support the use cases of what is needed for a given, let's say, industry. Look at trucking. Yeah, they're all experimenting with electric trucks, and that's all fine and well with autonomy. But those trucks, when hauling several tons of load, they're not going to be able to travel very far. And over the Rocky Mountains, good luck.
Yeah.
So I think that changes the dynamic where all of a sudden, okay, that's that last mile commute, if you will. And I think that kind of brings me back to something that's always been a passion of mine. Was I got into electric, or what we call personal electric vehicles. So I got into electric skateboards. And when electric skateboards, when they first came out to the industry, were very much marketed as being a last mile commute. It was, hey, you live a mile and a half from the train station or what have you. You, instead of walking there in the rain, or I guess rain, you wouldn't want to skateboard, but in the hot, heat in your suit, or your nice work clothes, and have to get sweaty. And then when you get to, downtown, you have to walk another 2 miles to get to work, what have you. Here's this electric skateboard that goes 5 miles of range. You can charge it in 30 minutes in the wall underneath your desk at your work. It only weighs 10 pounds, and you can pick it up, carry it underneath your arm next to your briefcase, and you can carry that onto the train.
Yeah.
That was what it was meant as a last mile commute. Where and I still have several electric skateboards, I should say, where I turned away from the industry of electric skateboarding as it evolved was 50-pound electric skateboards with full independent suspension on each wheel, pneumatic wheels and tires that were 10 inches big, so it's half the size of a BMX tire and wheel. And they did 50 miles an hour and 100 miles of range. That sounds awesome. That sounds like a monster of a vehicle.
Yeah.
I've ridden for 20 miles, 25, 30 miles of range on some of my boards in the past. And by the end of that, my feet are numb. And not like in a bad way, but I'm effectively ready to not ride anymore. I've reached my destination, if you will. I've enjoyed my activity for the day of riding. And I think that us understanding the landscape and the architecture of what use cases are, and not trying to overextend something and say, okay, an electric skateboard has to be a car replacement. and it can do 100 miles of range, 50 miles. So, okay, I mean, there are skateboards out there technically that have done 80 miles an hour, electric skateboards, regular skateboards, but there are electric skateboards. I think the Guinness Book World Record is about 88 miles an hour. That can get
Wow.
on the freeway. Would
That
you
could
want
pass you
to?
on the freeway.
Would you want to though? At that point, you might as well be wearing a full suit of body armor, which a lot of these guys smartly do. But I think that exemplifies that point that I'm making is what are you trying to achieve? Your Nissan Leaf to get to work 12 miles or 20 miles away or even 50 miles away when it has a 200-mile range is perfect. Charge it at work and you get back to, your range. And even if you have to go out after work and want to pop around the inner city of, Austin or wherever, it's great. And you have a charging infrastructure around you. Try cross country road tripping with that. And I've seen people do that in videos and they always say, yeah, it's totally feasible. I drive for 2.5 hours. I drive for, 3.5 hours. I drive 200 miles and then I stop and I charge for even fast charging. I only charge for an hour and a half. I just get a meal. Okay. I can gas up my car in 30 or in 5 minutes or less and do another 300 miles.
I was just thinking about trying to cross country the US and having to stop to charge every 3 hours and charging for an hour.
Yeah, even at best case scenario, every 3.5 or so hours, you're charging for an hour. And some people, that's not a problem. They want to stop, stretch their legs, let the dog walk around, maybe see a sight or two. Okay, maybe that works for your travel cases. There's a lot of other people that doesn't fall into the use case category. And unfortunately, the infrastructure is not there depending on where you're traveling. So you now have to really make sure you're planning your stops with an electric vehicle.
Yeah.
And I know that personally own an electric motorcycle. I know that I have a limited range. I know that I can't find myself mountain cruising up here in Colorado in the middle of nowhere and be 50 miles away from a gas station or a charge station rather with a range of 75 miles total. That doesn't work for me.
Yeah. I've seen those videos of those guys who ride the bikes crazy fast. They're like it's not a one wheel, but it's one big wheel that's right between their legs, and
Electric
they
unicycles.
dude,
Yes.
those things are crazy.
Some of those will do about 70 miles an hour and they've been recently going viral because a lot of those guys have been taking them on the highways. So I'd be curious to see what people think in the comments about whether or not you'd be comfortable seeing a gentleman with full body armor because they're wearing, again, smartly, full protective, knee pads, shin pads, wrist guards, elbow guards, full
you
face
know,
helmets, chest protectors, and they're
in
doing 70,
yeah.
80 miles an hour down the highway next to cars and weaving in and out of traffic.
You know what's crazy too is I've seen them with those vests where they have the big plastic protector or whatever on their back,
Yep,
like
the back protector.
or whatever it is. Like you can do that because you're not sitting on a motorcycle, you're standing. So like it's probably not as uncomfortable to have like that much stuff on you because you don't have to move as much. You're moving, but you know what I mean. It's a different kind of ride.
Yeah.
So
The danger with those things, in my unfortunate, or my humble opinion, is they are electronically controlled. There's a gyroscope in there that's interpreting your balance point, and it's fully responsible for it. My problem with that is if there's any electrical malfunction of any kind, or you
yeah,
push that thing too far past its limit, they all have an uncanny feature. They don't have any way to control this other than that. They just turn off, and then you
yeah.
face plant at 70 miles an hour, and you have no control over that when it decides to shut off. It sometimes
Yeah.
gives you some little vibrations and beeps, but you might not feel that at 70 miles an hour, hear that when you have a helmet on and you're listening to music and you're doing 70 miles an hour, leaning at 45 degrees in front of you, trying to go faster. When that thing cuts out, it just turns off. On a motorcycle,
Oh,
even electric, it just coasts.
yeah. I mean, it reminds me of like electric power steering systems now. It's
Hmm.
all the same stuff. It's like it was hydraulic. You could still turn. It was tough, but at least you're moving. And it's like now the electric systems just go out and you're like, gotta replace the whole thing.
But they
Like,
have a mechanical linkage, though.
that's
They have a
true. That's true.
mechanical
Yeah.
linkage system, so where if that's effectively it's power steering is the assist. It's electronic.
Yeah.
So it'd be like you cut your belt on a regular hydraulic power steering system and you just lost power steering. You can still steer the car though.
Well, that's what I was thinking would work with these things is that it wouldn't
No.
just dead stop. I thought it would just
No, they just turn
roll and you
off.
could. That's so
No, they turn
crazy.
off. The motor is again, it's gyroscopic. It's designed to keep you balanced. And when you give it forward input to lean forward, it wants to go forward up to a certain point. When it goes, I'm going too fast. It tries to push you backwards to say, hey, I'm going at my max limit. If you're like, nah, I want to go faster, it'll effectively just throw you off. There's no other way it can do that. You're literally straddling a motor. So imagine centrifugal force. If you are balancing the axis point of a motor, when that motor decides to turn off, you go forward.
Well, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I want to just wrap this up here. So as far as fuel goes, basically to wrap this all up, um, if not e-fuels, right? What is the next cleaner fuel? What is the next step? Um, Stronger detergents, maybe they start to alter the formula to try to deal with the direct injection valve protection issue. I don't know if there is an answer to that. I think that it's more of like maybe they're just going to have to find another way around that. I think the walnut blasting is the only answer right now.
Mhm.
Um, Higher base octane fuels. So, right now in Europe, they're running 95 plus. The It's called the RON standard in Europe.
Ooh.
So that's something that they're doing, and I'm sure with Autobahn makes sense. Uh, Probably have to have something like that. Um, and then bio blends like bio butanol or renewable, there's just so many things that they're attempting right now to kind of merge and blend, and synthetic hydrogen, everything's getting kind of meshed into like different formulas. So I think right now we're seeing the race for all of these fossil fuel companies to try to figure out the next thing, figure out the next step. Where are we going from here? How are we going to get clean fuel? Now, the counter to that is that cleaner blends will still emit CO2. So, does that become an issue for the government? Does that become something that they're still against, even if you can get it to almost zero CO2, right? The problem with this is a lot of this is political, right? We want to get rid of greenhouse gases. We want to go electric. Certain parties have certain stances, and I think that as long as it's still putting out CO2, it's still going to be a problem that they can point to and say, "Hey, this isn't working." Um, really only electric or e-fuels kind of solve the life cycle emission issue. Um, and
Except from a production standpoint.
Yeah. And the other thing is it's too incremental, right? It's essentially going to take a long time to the point where it may actually be too long. It might actually take too long to get this stuff on board. It may take too much money and too many changes to bring e-fuel to the broad economy, and then maybe by that point it's all over. Maybe it's everything's electric and we're not even going to mess with this anymore. So I think cleaner additives are good, but I think that the real leap is trying to get to carbon neutral, and I'm not sure how we're going to do that sticking with an actual fuel like a fossil fuel versus going to an e-fuel, which may be the answer, but like I said, it may just take too long and it may just not be feasible. Really I just wanted to take this topic and kind of walk through um everything from the refineries, the whole pipeline of how your fuel gets to your station, what your station is doing, how often they flip their tanks, how often um they get customers in, maybe that changes your kind of idea of where you get gas and why. And then also kind of touch on the e-fuel situation with Porsches and how they were able to race on the e-fuel, and maybe that is the
Mhm.
future. Um, so
Economies of scale, maybe.
that's the whole thing. I think that everything has to appeal to the broader public, and then you can get there, right? That's the whole reason Kickstarter exists. You can put something on the internet, and then you're asking for 10 grand and you get 500 grand. It's like, if Elon wants to go build tunnels, and people want that, they'll throw money at it, and eventually there will be tunnels. I think.
Under Las Vegas, I've ridden in
Yeah,
them. They're
yeah. I
cool.
I think that no matter what, if these companies come together, right? Let's say Exxon and BP and all these guys, if they come together and they're like, listen, they're like, for all of us to survive, we need to figure something out here. And they say, well, how many billions do you got? And they're like, dude, I got so many billions. And then the other guy's like, how many billions you got? He's like,
Lots of
oh,
billions.
BP's like, after the oil spill, we're a little less billions, but we still got them.
We're doing all right.
They could turn around and be like, what if we took all of our billions and we just took one of those billions? They're like, we could probably make this work.
It's a good point.
So I don't know. I think that I just don't want to see, as stupid as it sounds, right? Like I have to say I listened to a video this weekend of Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about this topic about e-cars, and it made me mad. I don't normally get mad about these things, but he made me upset because, people were saying like, why are we getting rid of fossil fuels? Why are we getting, how am I going to drive my race car? Like, because he was saying that the future of cars is that everything's going to be electric. The cars will all know where they're at. They're all going to interact with each other. You're going to use it to get to work and back. And, that will fix traffic. It'll fix everything because the cars can go 200 miles an hour because they're not going to hit each other and everything's going to be automated. And so they were like, well, what about the guy who wants to drive his 1970 Challenger? What does he do? And he was like, look at horses. Horses have evolved to the point where we no longer needed them. We had cars. So now if you want to ride your horse, you go to the horse park. And he's like, well, if you want to drive your Challenger, you're going to have the car park and you can go to this park. It'll be great. He's like, it'll have a track. You can go drive it. And then he was like, you can even take your electric car to the track, take your electric car home from the track. And I was like, I don't like this at all.
That level of it will never happen because of what I always say. In America, at least, we have what is called grandfathering. And as a proud owner of a 75 Ford Maverick that I inherited from my grandfather, rest in peace, you will never take my Ford Maverick off the road. I'm emissions exempt. You can't do anything to me at this point. Don't tell me I can't drive it. I'll be proud to say this is the definition of that's un-American. To say I can't drive my classic American car on the road here in America for whatever emission standards. It doesn't matter. I'm grandfathered in. They're never making any more 75 Ford Mavericks. So let me have it and leave me alone.
Well, I gotta say with with all the changes happening and everything, who knows? I mean, I think that we're slowly losing those old heads and as the drag strips go, things are changing. So it's painful though. I'm thinking about, these old Subarus, right? Like I just remember when I was in high school and you would without a doubt on the highway see a blob eye, see a bug eye, see, a hawk eye, see, they were just everywhere. And now I feel like you don't see them at all. And that happened very quickly. And now I'm like, oof, I hope.
I don't want to call it a conspiracy, but remember Cash for Clunkers?
Yeah.
I remember reading an article. I think it was I'm misquoting maybe. I think it was Jalopnik or somebody. It was somebody actually scrapped like a 78 like Bel Air for a Kia. Dead serious. Because the government was willing to put you in a brand new Kia for 0% down and give you $8,000 for your old clapped out Bel Air that, yeah, sure, probably wasn't running, but sitting outside in your shed and you didn't want to do anything with, but probably was worth a lot more if you sold it to the right person, though, a collector that would have restored it and done, done its honor, with it. But no, you scrapped it for a Kia because, yeah, it's nicer. It has a new radio with Bluetooth, so yeah, get rid of that old, Bel Air, that old Corvair, get rid of that old, you know, Chevy Corvette. That's just, your great grandpa. Yeah, you don't even know what that is. You don't even know about cars or care about cars because you just Uber everywhere and you drive a Tesla that drives you everywhere. So why would you want to restore that old thing? And you don't fix anything, you know? So why
Yeah.
would you want to restore something when you can't fix a doorknob in your house,
Yeah.
which is two Phillips head screws? Again, not trying to say anything, but just, all right, yeah, maybe that's why we're getting away from it. And the government is pushing us to go throw away your old antiques and your old relics and get the new because it's environmentally friendly and more fuel efficient. And I think that's where they're relishing in, yeah, there'll be the one or two classic car shows, you know, in your area, maybe if you're in a populated area. And yeah, there's gonna be maybe a 2 dozen guys. That's it. You know, it won't be the 50 plus, 250 plus guys that are showing up to these really classic car meets and showing off their classic cars that they restored and they had handed down by generations of them.
Yeah.
No, it'll be, hey, look at my Kia. I just put some underglows on.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that'll never go away is underglow.
Yes. And we have underglows on our car, not knocking underglows or Kias, I should say. Proudly, for anyone off topic, I'm Korean, so uh, go Kia, go Hyundai. Yeah, they're awesome. They've come a long way from the '90s. I'm proud to say, though.
Yeah. The one thing that makes me happy is that I feel like, mm, you know, media controls so many things, and I feel like, you saw when Baby Driver came out, that movie was huge, and I feel like that Subaru in that movie got so much attention. And those are the things that keep these cars alive. It keeps the stories alive. People are nostalgic about it. It gets a hype behind it. And I feel like as long as they keep incorporating these cars into things like that, it'll continue to stay in the front of people's minds. And then you and I won't have to carpool to the car park to go drive our Subarus. So, the one thing I was going to say related to fuel, right, is if you get to the point, right, where these car parks are the only places that have fuel and everything else is electric, then all of a sudden that's the only place you can go to drive your cars, And it's funny because this was reminding me of an anime that I watched. And it's this guy who I believe, I want to say, I was trying to think of it. I think he's got a Datsun in the show. And everybody's got all these future cars and everything. And he just drives around in his Datsun and he keeps gas on him and he just fills it. And they're like, "Why do you drive that thing?" And he's like, "Because." And then they get in it and they're like, "Holy crap, this thing is awesome." I just thought that was so cool. Um I keep trying to look it up. That's what I was doing this whole time. I was trying to remember what show it was. But yeah, I just loved that episode. I thought that was awesome. And not just that, like Initial D just made a new show that I watched,
I
and it
saw
was
that.
about the GT 6, which I thought was pretty cool. Or yeah, 86, right?
Yeah.
Well, anyways, I want to kind of wrap things up here. We got some awesome guests lined up. I'm very excited. I reached out to a couple people that I thought would make really cool guests coming on the show, and Dave and I are excited to sit down with them and leading up to Boxer Fest, I think it would be cool to have a guest or two, and then at Boxer Fest we're gonna be doing the live show, and you guys can come by and sit down with us, and we'll talk with you. We'll record, and you'll make it in the Boxer Fest episode. So
Yeah. Come hang
um,
out with us.
we are excited to get that content at Boxer Fest, and we want to hear your story. We want to hear about you, your build. Oh my God, it's happening again. Oh, I hate this camera so much, dude.
Oh, you got it.
Um, we want to hear your story, so we want you guys to come sit out with us, and we're just excited to wing it and have a good time. So we will catch you guys next time, and Dave and I are out. See you later.